Everyone had their favorite work, but we could not agree on that one book which would definitely leave a mark on a sophomore's mind. Someone suggested turning to popular science and documentaries because they reflect reality. But that idea was also abandoned since no one could recall a popular science book that turned their consciousness upside down during adolescence. Finally, we settled on historical prose, choosing a thrilling narrative based on real events but presented in artistic form, which gave the story dynamism. The task of the experiment was to study the impact of Pompeii on a group of youth, 18-19-year-old first- and second-year college students. Many at this age go through the difficult path of self-determination. They are concerned with racial, gender, and class issues, questions of their life purpose, and, of course, relationships. I, of course, did not expect Pompeii to turn their entire lives upside down, but I wanted to believe that the work would captivate them enough to cause long-term changes in the brain. It would be good if readers identified with the hero of the novel, desperately trying to save his beloved from death under a cloud of molten ash. To guarantee that the participants would indeed read the book, we developed a two-sided scheme. First, it was planned to read the text on paper. Although electronic books were just gaining popularity at that time, we did not want anyone to jump ahead, so we bought each participant a paper copy. Then, each copy was divided into 9 parts, which were to be given to participants one per day during the experiment. Second, to verify that participants were really reading the novel, they had to answer questions from a short test on the previous part before receiving the next portion. As for neuroimaging itself, the plan was for each participant to come to the laboratory every morning for 19 days, without weekends, and undergo resting state fMRI. The procedure would take about 7.5 minutes, during which the subject was required only to lie with their eyes closed. After that, they would answer questions about what they read the previous day. Also, to determine engagement, participants would daily rate the strength of emotions they experienced during reading the next part of the novel. During the first 5 days of the experiment, the book would not be given out. The resting state fMRI results for this period would serve as the starting point, baseline parameters including regular daily reading that is part of college life. Then, for 9 days, the scanning procedure would be applied during the portioned reading of Pompeii. And afterwards, the procedure would be repeated for another 5 days, during which the text would again be taken away from the subjects, to check if any changes persist after the end of active reading. I had never designed such a complex experiment before. Just the logistics alone, convincing 20 participants to come every day, like clockwork, at the same time for almost 3 weeks, while managing not-so-easy material, was daunting. We offered $400 for participation, but with the condition, minus $100 for each missed session. Additionally, we conducted preliminary screening, asking all candidates a simple question. What was the last book you read for pleasure? Every student reads textbooks during the semester, but we needed only those who managed to read for themselves. We selected students who had read at least one book for their own pleasure during the preceding part of the academic year. In the end, 19 participants completed the experiment, 11 females and 8 males. Before dealing with the fMRI results, it was necessary to find out whether the book had affected them at all. Did they identify with Attilius and Cornelia, the hero's beloved? Were they captivated by the plot, or did they perceive the described events as a historical chronicle evoking no emotions? We got one hint from the participants, daily ratings of the emotions they experienced while reading. The formulation of the request for evaluation varied slightly depending on the content of the next portion, but the essence was as follows. Rate the emotional arousal you experienced during reading on a scale from 1 to 4. Above the experimental scheme. During 19 days, participants undergo resting state fMRI. From the 6th to the 14th day, they read one portion of the novel, Pompeii, each evening. Below, the rating of emotional arousal for each portion, indicating increasing engagement of readers as the plot approaches its climax. At first, the emotional arousal ratings held slightly above the middle of the scale, but from the 5th day, when they read about the grand Roman feast and orgy, the numbers started to rise. This continued until the episode of the Vesuvius eruption on the 7th day. Then there was a brief decline, followed by a sharp rise again on the last portion of the text, where Attilius and his beloved, as well as the entire city, are buried under volcanic ash. The curve on the graph seems similar to the canonical plot type, rags to riches, mentioned in Chapter 8. But since in the end everyone dies, Pompeii, by plot canon, is an example of riches to rags. Although the graphs are related, we did not ask participants whether they experienced positive or negative emotions. The curve informed us that the material at least had a measurable impact on the readers. If the line on the graph had been flat, without fluctuations, we would have been concerned that participants read inattentively or were not emotionally engaged. Confident that the book caused at least short-term changes in subjective sensations, we analyzed the results of the 19-day resting state neural activity scanning of participants, identifying which brain regions showed these changes. Considering the high emotional arousal of our subjects, I expected to see changes in regions related to emotions, but my expectations were not met. We saw a network formed between different brain areas with a single central node and branches diverging from it, with the node located in the area of the left temporal lobe called the angular gyrus. This area is known for its important role in language comprehension. Thus, the observed changes in connectivity represented a residual effect of reading, as such, roughly like muscle soreness the day after a workout. To determine whether the novel caused long-term changes, we investigated another pattern, one that emerged at the beginning of the 9-day period of working with the book and persisted until its end. This pattern manifested only in one part of the network, the strip of the sensory-motor cortex. We did not expect this because this area is unrelated to emotions. The sensory-motor zone consists of folds of the cortex along the central sulcus of the brain, which receive tactile information. In addition, this area sends motor impulses. Why then did the pattern of neural activity in this area change during reading of the novel? A literary work immerses the reader in the world created by the author. Often, the reader truly feels in the skin of the character. But this would only explain changes in the sensory-motor cortex during the period of direct work with the book, whereas they persisted after reading ended. Unfortunately, the experiment continued only 5 days after the reading, so we do not know how long such traces can persist in principle. This does not negate the fact that sensory-motor changes resonate with the subjective feeling of change under the influence of the book. Mentally sifting through works that changed my life, after Foundation and Dune, there were also the teachings of Don Juan and the Monkey Wrench Gang. I cannot recall all plots in detail, but I distinctly and vividly remember the characters: Hari Seldon and the Mule, Paul Atreides, Don Juan, Doc Sarvis. Now, looking back, I understand that I was probably attracted by their rebelliousness, disdain for established social norms, and desire to pave their own way. All these are now included in my identity, or, at least, in my self-image. To understand why fictional characters affect us so strongly, let's return to the universal monomyth. Over millions of years of cultural evolution, the human brain has adapted to absorb the stories of main characters like a sponge. When we read a book whose protagonist resonates with our own narrative, their story and ours complement and reinforce each other. We become closer to the hero, at least in our own consciousness, and this strengthens the resonance, which in this case results in positive feedback. Changes in the sensory-motor cortex indicate that we truly live through the unfolding events as if in the hero's guise. It can even be assumed that this resonance creates a kind of muscle memory, repeatedly activated in our personal narrative. If the task is only to resonate with a particular character, the method of storytelling is not especially important. Cinema and television can claim the same effect. At some level, everything can change the brain. The question is only the degree of change. Parents and psychologists have lamented the harmful effects of television on children since the beginning of broadcasting in the 1940s, yet people still watch it. Apparently, there is nothing inherently harmful in television. Its main harm lies in potentially displacing other activities from which it distracts children and adults. So far, the most effective means of changing narrative trajectories in the brain remains the book. Neuroimaging shows that precisely due to immersiveness, the necessity to immerse oneself in the process, reading touches the brain's imagination system. To do this, the brain, just like when replaying memories, repurposes its sensory systems, but now their task is to help the reader empathize with the life of the character. A good novel places the reader in the skin of the hero so organically that we truly feel what happens to them almost physically. According to brain activity visualization experiments, traces of this simulation remain for at least several days. But I believe they can persist even longer if the reading material supports this. These discoveries lead to an intriguing thought that the stories we consume, especially in reading mode, serve as food for our mind. The digestive analogy does not end there. A person is what they eat. The consumed stories become part of us, and as a result of repeated stimulation of sensory centers, a narrative analog of muscle memory is formed. The brain gets used to narrative archetypes, and even if somewhere deep in consciousness you remember that they are fictional, it does not matter. They still strengthen the templates in your brain to which you turn when interpreting what is happening in your real life. The bright side of this coin is that you can control which stories to consume yourself. Hero stories nourish your sense that you are also a hero making your journey. But as we will see in the next chapter, if you feed only on conspiracy theories and stories about secret backstage forces, your narrative will lead you astray, and you will begin to look at the world through gloomy glasses of suspicion and paranoia. Chapter 15. Captive Narratives. In the second part of the book, we talked about the human ability to create a model of mental state, MMS, a capacity that evolved to allow us to simulate and imagine what is happening in another person's consciousness. Thanks to MMS, we manage tasks requiring coordinated actions, the deer hunt, and our joint life overall becomes somewhat simpler. However, while making it easier for us to see through others' eyes, MMS opens a backdoor into our brain, and if we are not vigilant, trash in the form of distorted facts will start to seep in with the incoming information, subjugating our narratives. By continuing to consume garbage information, a person risks, unwittingly, changing their own self-concept. And on a certain scale, this phenomenon can take a serious turn. If enough people believe in an illusion, it ceases to be an illusion. We perceive and explain what is happening through narratives absorbed throughout our lives. If you are surrounded by people constantly insisting on alien abductions and secret CIA cover-ups, you too will begin to see trickery and conspiracies everywhere. In this chapter, we will see how certain types of stories, penetrating our brain, imperceptibly capture our personal narratives. I, of course, mean conspiracy theories. You may feel any way about them, but researchers have accumulated a substantial body of data, allowing us to understand how such theories form and why so many people start to believe in them. And paradoxically, conspiracy theories can teach even the most hardened skeptic a priceless lesson about rewriting narratives, demonstrating how easily a story can be turned upside down and the world seen in a completely different light. This is an effective technique, suitable for rethinking and distorting any narrative, including your own. But first, we have to dive down the rabbit hole. On May 4, 2020, when U.S. businesses had been shut down for the third month due to COVID restrictions, and people were almost not allowed out of their homes to reduce virus spread, a 26-minute video called Plandemic appeared online. It presented a chilling story that the coronavirus epidemic was engineered by a scientific medical clique led by Dr. Anthony Fauci to promote vaccination with patented drugs under their names. The video immediately spread across the internet. Its main heroine, researcher Judy Mikovits, was known among virologists as an active opponent of vaccinations, so her appearance in this controversial video surprised no one familiar with her position. Thanks to the Plandemic saga, we have a convenient example to analyze how false narratives and conspiracy theories are constructed. History knows countless similar narratives that spread long before the internet appeared. So why did Plandemic strike so accurately? The answer should be sought in the science of conspiracy theories. Just remember that what follows is, by no means, a manual for creating them. Consider this explanation more like an inoculation against such theories and a basic guide to rewriting someone's narrative with such a detonator. If we look at the modern anti-vaccination movement in a historical context, we see that it plays on the same fears and concerns about personal freedom that have been its leaven since the time of Edward Jenner. It is often simply impossible to convince the bearer of this protest mood, especially if, As often happens, a spiritual and philosophical basis underlies it. Usually, anti-vaxxers are highly educated people. The anti-vaccination ideology is built on a solid foundation of ideas about the environment, treatment, new age spiritual currents, and personal freedom. Originally born as an opinion about one particular vaccine, this ideology is now almost becoming a religion or a mass illusion. The explosive growth of anti-vaccination sentiments is also due to the characteristics of those who sow these sentiments. As often happens with narratives, most of us do not possess the facts, in this case, concerning vaccines, and are forced to rely on the information provided by the narrator. And here we return to the epistemological question of where our knowledge comes from. Lacking evidence, it is quite natural to rely instead on the apparent sincerity or competence of the narrator. This competence, in turn, is supported by their reputation and eloquence. We have already seen how readily our brain incorporates others' narratives and how expert opinion frees us from the burdensome necessity to think for ourselves. As a scientist and an honest person, I would prefer to absorb fewer false or misinterpreted narratives, but sometimes understanding what is happening is not easy. Plandemic played on all three motives. Using the existing fear of vaccination as a conspiratorial explanation for disorders like autism, the causes of which have yet to be established, it mixed in fresh fear of the coronavirus. Most people felt helpless before the pathogen, but instead of fighting this mass condition rationally, relying on scientific data and reliable evidence, Plandemic replaced the appeal to personal responsibility with accusations. Conspiracists pointed an accusing finger at the vile representatives of the government elite seeking to profit from the vaccine under development. Anthony Fauci was perfect for the role of villain. A highbrow scientist from government structures, holder of a number of diverse patents, unrelated to coronavirus, and the one who ruined much blood for Judy Mikovits, the heroine of the video. Plandemic begins by portraying Mikovits as a martyr who suffered in the struggle for the truth. Producer and narrator Willis sets the corresponding mood with this sinister introduction. At the peak of her career, Dr. Mikovits published an article in Science that caused the effect of a bombshell. She shocked scientific circles with the news that widespread use of embryonic and animal tissues leads to devastating epidemics of chronic diseases. The minions of Big Pharma, turning against Dr. Mikovits for revealing this horrifying secret, intended to deprive her of reputation, career, and personal life. Now, with the fate of the peoples of the whole world at stake, Dr. Mikovits will reveal the names of those sowing the infection of corruption, endangering all humanity's lives. Martyr narratives have deep roots. The Greek mu alpha rho tau upsilon sigma, martyr, refers to a witness, that is, a person ready to defend the knowledge they have. In Christianity, this knowledge implies the Word of God, and martyrdom in the Catholic Church is a direct path to sainthood. However, originally in testimony there was nothing religious. Aristotle, for example, understood a martyr as a virtuous person who always speaks the truth. Of course, such a quality won't earn you many friends. Those who speak out about anything bluntly inevitably alienate those around them. Society sometimes turns away from witnesses. In the not-so-distant past, they were often destroyed. Martyrs evoke diametrically opposed reactions. Their views may contradict the norm, and then they become outcasts. As we remember from Chapter 11, society depends on maintaining social norms, so when a threat to such foundations arises, some well-meaning citizens prefer to intervene and punish the violators. That is why martyrs are ostracized. At the same time, they are revered often after death for courage in speaking the truth, in their understanding and readiness to stand for it until their last breath. The martyr is the archetypal hero. Just recall archetypes: Socrates, Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, Joan of Arc, Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, Malcolm X, Che Guevara, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela. What am I actually leading to? Beware of the martyr narrative, even when speaking the truth to authorities. A martyr is quite likely nursing a grudge against them for unfair treatment, and their truth may be poisoned by this resentment. The martyrs mentioned above are unusual in that they achieved fame that an ordinary truth-teller can only dream of. Yet martyrdom represents one of the 6 basic plot types listed in Chapter 8 and well known to all of us. We are all adept from time to time at adopting the victim pose in our personal dramas. It is an attempt to turn a minus into a plus in the plot, from prince to pauper, transforming it into the plot, a man driven into a corner. So martyrdom is much more widespread than we would like to admit. It is only a matter of degree. Throughout the book, I have argued that narratives are constructs conveying sequences of events, and that the same sequence can be told by several different narratives. Without confirming information, it is hard to understand whether the narrative before us is true or false. Conspiracy theories, especially those involving a martyr, serve us as an excellent lesson in narrative deconstruction. The same method can be applied to any suspicious account. Here is a short list of criteria. Black circle reliability of the narrator. How authoritative and competent are they? Could they be biased? Is there dissatisfaction present in the narrative? Are there claims being made? These may be justified, especially if dictated by objectively confirmed collective harm, for example, when it concerns slaves or indigenous peoples. But there may also be personal score settling. Pay attention to past grievances and experienced humiliation. Source of epistemology. Ask yourself, how does the narrator know what they claim to know? And finally, beware of martyrs. Perhaps, reading these questions, you wonder whether the person promoting a false narrative knows themselves about its falsity. If the bearer of a defective epistemology, spreading false narratives out of their own ignorance, we are ready to forgive, then we are far less indulgent towards a person intentionally sowing lies. In the previous chapter, I argued that a person is what they eat. Conspiracy theorists go even further in this sense, turning consumers into disseminators. Playing with conspiracy theories just for fun is probably harmless, but if you spend hours daily rummaging through the internet searching for like-minded people, you risk developing precisely that defective epistemology or becoming trapped in an information bubble, as it is popularly called in the media. In this case, no comparison with reality will occur, no external benchmarks will be available, and we get an extreme degree of confirmation bias. But there is encouraging news. Having realized how cleverly some false narratives capture our self-perception, you will surely begin to wonder whether narratives of other genres can likewise subjugate you. Are there alternative narratives that also nourish our journey plot, but more beneficially? Something capable of changing you for the better? I believe there are. In the remaining chapters, I propose strategies for creating new narratives capable of changing both your self-perception and your prospects for further development. Chapter 16. So you won't have to regret. What unites the branching points is the looming possibility of regretting one's choice. Interestingly, regret can be directed both at the past and at the future. Everyone has something in their past they would like to change. Maybe you hurt someone in high school, or maybe you didn't do something because you never got around to it or lacked the courage. We regret both the done and the undone. However, regret can also be projected into the future. Each person forms their own unique set of regrets, and if they teach us anything, it is to strive to avoid them at all costs in the future. And here the predictive brain comes into play. We make decisions by imagining our future self, looking back and try our best to avoid future regret. Regret is a twisted form of time manipulation. Looking at its contortions, one might think that only humans subject themselves to such mental torture. But this is not so. In reality, it is a powerful type of learning discovered by evolution and endowed to all animals. Regret is embedded in our deepest biological foundations, but that does not mean it cannot simultaneously be adapted to reformat our current and future narratives. As a powerful predictive machine, the brain actively travels through time, repeatedly moving from the present to the future and sometimes steering into the past for guidance and hints. This system works even when we do not think about it. Without it, we would not even manage to cross the street without getting hit by a car. It comes to the fore when we need to make a conscious decision. The more important the decision, the more obvious it becomes that we peer into the future, trying to imagine what it will be like under one or another hypothetical outcome. This is roughly the same as what a writer does when planning plot lines, but our forecasts are seasoned with worry about possible losses. No one wants to someday regret the choice made. Another form of counterfactual thinking occurs in our reflections on our own choices. Imagine you were not refused a job, but on the contrary, were ready to be hired by two places simultaneously. In one, you would earn more than in the other, but you would have to move to another city. Suppose, tempted by the higher income, you choose the option with relocation, but 5 years later you already hate both the job and the city and regret not having chosen the other option at the time. This is regret. You imagine an alternative state of affairs, what the world would have been like had you made a different decision then. In recent years, regret has attracted the attention of both neuroscientists and economists. A seemingly strange partnership, but regret is a psychological phenomenon that can be represented as an equation, and like any human decision that can be mathematically described, it is very interesting to economists. At the same time, the cognitive process reduced to an equation can be studied by searching for its correlates in the brain. The regret equation, without delving into mathematical intricacies, can be described as follows. Imagine you are at a crossroads and need to choose one of two options. Both are hypothetically beneficial, but it is not yet possible to say for sure. According to standard economic theory, under such circumstances, you should choose the option with the highest expected utility, calculated as the magnitude of benefit multiplied by the probability of obtaining it. But imagining your future self, you realize, if hopes are not fulfilled, you will suffer for not having chosen the other option. The equation allows expressing regret as the difference between what could have been and what is, and if the choice turns out to be correct, then what is will surpass what could have been, and you will rejoice. According to this theory, we not only experience counterfactual outcomes as relative amounts of regret and rejoicing, but we also make decisions aimed at minimizing future regret. Evolution selects only those processes that contribute to survival, but regret, by its very nature, is an emotion directed at the past. Nevertheless, suffering over what has been helps us better build the future. Both we and other animals learn from our mistakes to avoid repeating them. Counterfactual learning is especially effective when the choice may prove fatal. In such cases, it is much more useful to mentally model the consequences than to test them on oneself. Here I again recall the accident I had as a teenager while riding my bicycle. As I already mentioned in Chapter 6, this memory is dissociated, and I observe the events as if from the outside. I also see, again as if from the outside, how it would have ended if I had ridden a bit faster or if the driver had not swerved the wheel at the last second. Vividly and realistically, I see myself smeared across the grille of the truck. A very impressive counterfactual spectacle. Even now, almost 40 years later, this fictitious signal, etched in my brain, makes me, when riding my bike, keep a close eye on trucks, even if they are moving in the opposite lane. On every bike outing, I do my best not to end up again at such a turning point. I did not have to really be flattened on the truck's hood to learn this. So counterfactual learning really is a powerful thing. The hypothesis that the ability for regret developed in animals during evolution as providing a survival advantage seems quite convincing, though concrete evidence supporting it is hard to find. All the more remarkable is that the adaptive value of individual regret is confirmed by recent data from artificial intelligence development. One of the popular methods in computer science for testing algorithms is tournaments. These competitions provide a hyper-accelerated environment for evolution, where winners advance further and losers are rapidly eliminated. Among such competitions is the annual computer poker tournament. Poker is a game with incomplete information, meaning a participant never receives data in the desired amount during a round since some cards are hidden by other players. Such games are usually harder for computers than chess, a game with complete information where every move is open. The theory of regret is a mathematical abstraction for those counterfactual states that we anticipate and experience. Since it is a simple equation describing only the difference between what happened and what could have happened, it does not distinguish regret over what was done from regret over what was not done. But, as psychology shows, this distinction exists. Jilovich and Medvec identified several factors provoking regret over the undone. First, regret intensifies over time, since with every recollection of a missed opportunity, a person becomes more convinced that the counterfactual outcome was better than the real one. But this is an illusion, as we are not given to know how events would have unfolded if the action had been taken. Second, along with the conviction of the superiority of the alternative reality, grows the inexplicability of the refusal to act. The more inexplicable this refusal seems, the more likely that regret will be accompanied by annoyance. And finally, if the consequences of the action we regret are already outlined, since we know the result, then the consequences of inaction are lost in infinity. The number of possible alternative realities is limited only by our imagination. Future decisions are also influenced by the opposite of regret triumph. This counterfactual scenario can also be approached with reflection and evaluation. Markman provides examples such as, "This is almost an excellent grade, and I got a C, just short of a B." The second statement, ascending evaluation, stimulates more, encouraging greater effort in the future.